Then Tessim Reis, a little more than halfway down the page. Ksubas Isha B'Ziburis. The ksuba is ziburis, meaning the lowest quality fields. I believe that's what we're holding.
Please tell the uninformed among us again why it is.
So we have three.
Take the lowest quality.
There's three types of fields, right? It's idis, beinus, and ziburis.
Right.
So yesterday, the reason why ksuba takes ziburis is because a woman wants to get married more than a man wants to get married.
So she's willing to take the worst deal. Okay, all right, I got it.
Therefore, in other words, typically there's a reason. Like, for example, ksuba is like a debt.
Mm-hmm. It's a secured debt.
A creditor is entitled to beinus mid-range only because of a takana, because of a decree that we're concerned that if we allow him to take, if we allow the debtor to pay back with the lowest quality fields, nobody will lend money. And the Gemara is saying because a woman very much wants to get married, therefore that reasoning does not apply to ksuba.
Let's see. All right.
We'll get to it in a moment now because things change a little bit.
Presumably she also wants to stand.
Yeah. Okay, ksuba is isha v'ziburis. Ksuba is v'ziburis. Amar Zutra Breder of Nachman. So Zutra comes with this interesting line of reasoning. Lo yamaran el miyasmi. The fact that a ksuba is taken from ziburis is true only when it's taken from the orphans. Alvaminedi day, but when a ksuba is paid out from the husband, the beinus is paid with mid-range property. So this is a little bit ground shaking. He's changing the whole Mishnah. Ksubas isha is no longer ziburis. Ksubas isha is really beinus. It's mid-range. But for the orphans pay ziburis. So the Gemara asks if that's the case. In my area, ksubas isha, I feel kol milinami. What's unique about ksuba? Everything is in the same category. Because we saw in the Mishnah, any type of collection from the orphans is paid out from ziburis, the lowest quality. Elav, when the Mishnah says that ksubas isha is ziburis, it doesn't mean from the orphans because everything the orphans pay is ziburis. Elav minei, it's talking about the husband himself, and you see here quite to the contrary of Mar Zutra. Mar Zutra is making the claim that the husband himself has to pay beinus mid-range, and only the inheritors pay ziburis. The Gemara is saying the inheritors always pay ziburis. So when the Mishnah says that the ksuba is paid out with ziburis, it must be it's referring to the husbands. So Gemara says, let me ask me. The Gemara says, no proof. It could be we're talking about the inheritors. Ksubas isha it's tzrichalei. Ksubas isha is in a different category. In other words, it would seem to reason that when we say that the inheritors pay back with ziburis, that's a reference to everything except for ksuba. Ksuba you pay back with beinus. Why would ksuba be different? Why would ksuba collect from the inheritors the beinus? Because mishum chena, because you want to treat her in a dignified manner. So therefore, it's necessary for the Mishnah to repeat itself to effectively say twice that the inheritors only pay ziburis, and a ksuba is in the same category. It also gets ziburis. Don't think because to ensure the woman's dignity, we would require her to get beinus. The Mishnah saying no, otherwise that she always gets ziburis. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Toshma, let's try to bring another proof. Rameir says, Ksubas isha b'beinus. Ksubas Isha collects baitiness. The Gemara wants to know Mimana. Okay, so our Mishnah says Ksubas Isha Ziburis. Rameir says it gets baitiness. Who has to pay the baitiness? Ilay asked me if Rameir's opinion is it comes for the inheritors, the orphans. So the Gemara says Leslie the Rameir had not ain't from the same element of Ziburis. Does Rameir disagree with the statement that the orphans always pay Ziburis? Elalav, it must be that Rameir's opinion is Minay, the husband pays baitiness. Mechlal Rabbanan Savri, Ziburis. Evidently, it's specifically Rameir's opinion that says that you pay baitiness. But the rabbis disagree and say that even the husband pays Ziburis. And this is a question on Mar Zutra. Mar Zutra is saying it's sort of universal opinion that it's universal opinion that the husband pays baitiness. It's not the case. That seems to be the opinion of Rameir. And the rabbis disagree. So Mar says no proof. Let me ask me. 1 second.
Line position, please, Rabbi.
We're 5 lines above the wide lines. Samara says no. Rameir's opinion that says that a ksuba gets paid out by baitiness, is talking about the orphans paying out the ksuba. So why is ksuba different? Every other obligation that the orphans pay is from ziburis. Why is ksuba different? Shining ksuba to make sure the woman is treated with dignity. We require her to get mid-range property even from the orphans. And Rameir would disagree with the statement that orphans only pay ziburis. He would say orphans only pay ziburis except for ksuba, which they pay baitiness. Now, what would the opinion of Rameir be in terms of the husband? We don't know, and that's why presumably the rabbi's opinion could be the rabbis would agree that when the husband's paying the ksuba, he pays baitiness. Okay, so back to the original question: is that the case? For 4 lines above the wider lines, 5 lines above the widest lines. Amar Abaye tries to prove this question of is ksubas isha b'baininus from the husband, or is it not? Or is it ziburis?
What page are you on?
Mem Testament base. 49.
Thank you.
49b.
Okay, we're toward the bottom of the page, and first one line is Toshma. Toshma, Hanazok and Shamalhan be'idis. Damages are paid out in idis. Balchayev be'baininus. A debt is paid out in baininus. Ksubas isha b'ziburis. So the Gemara says, Miman, who exactly is the ksubas isha paying the ziburis? Ilay may ask me if you're telling me it's from the orphans. My area ksubas isha, I feel call hainami. It's not just ksuba, it's everything else too. Everything is in the same category. In other words, the Mishnah is sort of differentiating between damages, debt, and ksuba. Damage is ziburis, debt is baininus, ksuba is ziburis. When is this difference true? If we're talking about from the inheritors, actually they're all the same. Everything gets ziburis. Okay, 1 second. Elalav, it must be talking about minay, from the person who damaged, the person who borrowed, or the person who wrote out a ksuba, got married. And what do we see from here? The ksuba is paid out the ziburis. So the Gemara says, no proof. Why not? Okay, we're talking about a scenario where a person became an Arav. We'll get to some more specifics about an Arav in a moment. It's not so simple to become an Arav for Ksuba.
What if Rabbi is?
An Arav is a guarantor.
Okay.
There's 2 types of guarantors. We'll see that as well in a moment. An Arav Kabbalan is an Arav who accepts full responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
An Arav Kabbalan is treated exactly identical to the creditor. So for example, if I owe you $100 and Steve signs as an Arav Kabbalan, you can collect. You can go straight to Steve. You don't even have to stop before my door.
Oh, bad luck, usually.
If this is very common, if you're in today's day and age, if you're going to borrow from a free loan society, Gemach, they will demand an Arav Kabbalan. And the reason for an Arav Kabbalah is that they're going to go to the debtor first before they go to the guarantor who's a Kabbalah, just because, sort of respectful. But there's an Arav, regular Arav, first you have to clear the Arav bankrupt, then you can collect, because it's very difficult to do that. That's why nobody takes an Arav today. It's always going to be an Arav Kabbalah. So an Arav Kabbalah is exactly identical. It's so identical that you don't even need to go to the debtor, the one who owes the money. You can go straight to the Arav Kabbalah. A standard Arav has to pay back if the guy is sort of declared bankrupt, meaning the court determines that he doesn't have the means to pay back, then you can go to the Arav. In both scenarios, if you go to the Arav, you go to the guarantor, and he has to pay either because you declare the first guy bankrupt because he's a regular Arav, or because he's a Kabbalah and he just went straight to the Arav, the guarantor is always allowed to collect his payment from the guy who should have been paying. Okay. Now, because we're talking about an Arav has to pay the same status as the guy who took out who's responsible for the payment. So if the guy is responsible for a payment of Nezikin, the Arav of Nezikin, the guarantor of the Nezikin damages, must pay from Idis. If he's a guarantor on a debt, he pays Baininus. And if he's a guarantor of Iksuba, he pays Ziburis. Now, hold on a second. Actually, according to Marzutra, what does Ksuba pay? Baininus. But a guarantor of Ksuba pays Ziburis. We'll have to explain why that is. In other words, guarantor of Nezikin, the guy himself, the guy who damaged, what does he pay? He pays Idis. The guarantor of the Arav set pays also Idis. A creditor, right? The debtor commits to a loan. He has to pay back Baininus. So to the Arav must pay Baininus. Ksuba is somehow different. The husband would be obligated to pay back Baininus according to the opinion of Marzutra, and the Arav would pay Ziburis. Why is that? The debtor and the debtor to a loan and the guy who damaged, when they pay back, they have to pay back Idis and Baininus and Idis respectively. So therefore, the Arav, the guarantor, also pays back the same category. However, Ksubas Isha, the La'achar Misagavya, Ksuba that's often paid after the husband dies, Ula'achar Misami Gavya, Miyasmi. Right, there's two ways to pay out a Ksuba. Number one is if the husband divorces. Number two is if he dies. Because if he dies, who's paying back the loan? Who's paying back the debt? It's going to be the kids, the orphans. And who are you collecting from when you collect from the orphans? What are you collecting? You're collecting Ziburis. So his responsibility also extends similarly. It's equal to the responsibility of the kids, which is Ziburis.
Are we on 58 now, Rabbi?
No, 49b, and we're still 4 lines in the bottom of the page, a little more than halfway down the 4th line. Okay. This is a very interesting line of reasoning, because sometimes Ksuba is paid at, not sometimes, let's say half the time, or less, let's say half the time, Ksuba is paid out by the orphans. So the Arav effectively accepts the minimal responsibility, which in this case would be the orphan's responsibility, which would be Ziburis. It's only the husband himself would have to pay Baininus, but a guarantor would accept the responsibility of the one who pays. Who pays in the majority of cases? The orphans. Therefore, his responsibility is Ziburis. We together? Okay, if we're not together on Zoom, feel free to interrupt me. Okay. The typically the Arav the Ksuba lo mishtabed b'kablan. Okay, so now we get into so we'll take a pause here for a few moments until we get back to a top and Nun and Aleph. So where are we? We're in the middle of discussing a question of Marzutra. What did Marzutra say? Ksubas Isha pays out. Instead, the Mishnah says Ksubas Isha pays Ziburis. And says Marzutra, no, it's more complicated than that. Depends who's paying. If it's the husband that's paying, it's Baininus. If it's the kids that are paying, it's going to be Ziburis. Okay. pause here for a moment. We'll get back to it. We'll get back to it in a few minutes. Now the Gemara goes on to a question relating to Arav. Okay, now what's interesting is let's talk about Arav in, let's say, two ways, two different concepts to Arav. Number one is, can you become an Arav when you're a guarantor to somebody who doesn't have the means of payments? Is that permitted? So you have the pauper of town. The pauper of town is borrowing money. We know he does not have the means to pay back, and you become an Arav. Is that type of Arav acceptable? The second question we'll deal with is one second. Sure. Let's see the Gemara. Typically, the Arav Yeksuba loy mishtabit. We have another problem here. The problem is that for Ksuba, Arav does not work. 1 second. Okay. So let's try to figure this out here in a second. The reason is as follows: because who are you committed to? You're committed to make a payment to the woman, right? An Arav of a loan commits to pay the loan to the creditor, right? To the one who issued the loan. Now, the one who issued the loan took a loss. He gave his own money up, and he transferred it to somebody else. And now you're making a payment that he can recoup his loss. That's what the guarantor is doing. By Ksuba, the woman has not suffered any loss. This is the other point. And therefore it's questionable whether an Arav can have effect. There's the woman who the payment was being made to never took any loss for getting married. She never had to give any money. The question is, when Arav work, it's sort of more of a commitment to pay than an actual loan. There's no loan here. The loan and damages both had a loss on behalf of the one receiving the money. Over here, there's no loss to the woman. The question is whether the concept of a guarantor exists in that space. So the Gemara will point out that it doesn't. You can't become a guarantor to a ksuba. So the Gemara says, "V'tebele the Arav ksuba lo mishtabet." So we have another problem here, technical problem. How can you be an Arav to a ksuba if there is no Arav? But you can't be an Arav to a ksuba again for two reasons. First being that there is no loss on behalf of the woman, and the second point is, 1 second. Okay, was that
a one-way transaction, not a two-way transaction?
Right. The second point we'll get to in a moment, which is a question of maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe the husband did have the ksuba prepared to pay, maybe not. So people get married, or you're allowed to get married without $15,000 in the bank, which is effectively the value of ksuba. And maybe you can't become an Arav if the guy doesn't have the money to be able to pay up. Okay, anyways, the Gemara's resolution is, but Kabbalah, we're talking about where he's an Arav Kabbalah. He accepts full responsibility, and that could be done with regard to ksuba. Okay, this makes sense if you could become a Kabbalah even if the debtor did not have the assets to pay back when he borrowed the money. So even if the husband didn't have $15,000 in the bank account when they got married, he can still become an Arav Kabbalah. According to the opinion that says the one committing to making the payments, the original debtor has to have the money available to repay. So then if if he didn't have the money, then the Kalban doesn't work. So Gemara says, he had the money, but he had. So then the question obviously is, why are you going to the Arv? Why are you collecting the guy himself? So Gemara says, Ishtadif, it got ruined, so it's not worth anything anymore. Another possibility is that why typically do we say that an Arv is not committed in these circumstances? 1 second.
458, Rabbi.
Last line of 49b. Another possibility is as follows. The argument that the woman, because the woman did not take a loss, he's not serious about becoming an Arv. And that's why a guarantor doesn't work. The Gemara proposes, and if a person takes responsibility for his son, that we say is sincere. Even though his son, the woman never took a loss, he's still sincere about being a guarantor. And therefore this sort of would be an exception to the rule. Typically the rule would be that the one getting the payment from the guarantor would have had to take a loss when the loan was issued. In other words, a loan as opposed to a responsibility. And the Kiddush of Gemara is no, person does this, if a person accepts responsibility for his son, that's in a different category, and that would not require this condition. This is what we see in the Gemara. Itmar, what we learn, Arav Diksuba, Divra Kollel Mishtabit. Everyone agrees that a guarantor of Iksuba does not pay. He's not committed to this responsibility. Kablan de Bachayv, if a guy accepts full responsibility for a debt, it's Divra Kol Mishtabit. Everybody holds that type of responsibility works. Arav de Bachayv, the Kablan de Ksuba, an Arav of a debt or an Arav or a Kablan, someone who accepts full responsibility for Ksuba, Pligi, it's a debate. Ikelaman the Amar, there is one opinion that says, Alfagav de Leslie Nechse Loive Mishtabit, even though the Loive does not have the assets to repay and never did, there's still a commitment here on behalf of the guarantor. Ikelaman the Amar, there's another opinion that says, Islay Mishtabit, Ileslay Loy Mishtabit. If the Arav has, if the Balchay, if the debtor, he has assets to pay back at the moment of borrowing, then we say the Arav is committed. But if he doesn't have the assets, the Arav is not committed. The idea sort of is a guarantor means if you can't pay, then I'll pay. But if the guy never had the ability to pay, there's no if. You never had the ability to pay, and the guy's not serious. However, if he's a Kablan is taking equal responsibility. And because of equal responsibility, therefore, the Kablan works. That Arav is always serious. The Hilchson Halacha is the Kulu in all the scenarios. Even if the guy, the borrower, did not have the money at the time he borrowed, the Arav, the guarantor, is committed, with the exception of Barmi Arav Tiksuba, Afgav Islay Loy Mishtabit. The Ksuba is different, even though the husband might have the money available at the time they got married, there's still no commitment. My time up. Mitzvah David v'loy midichasra. He's doing a mitzvah by getting married and committing to Ksuba v'loy midichasra, and the woman is not losing out on anything. And therefore, she's not relying on the Arav, so to speak. And therefore the Arav is not committed. Okay. Getting back to the original question of Mar Zutra. What is the story with Mar Zutra? Amar Ravina. Ravina says, we're on 50a, about 10 lines down, 9 lines down. Toshma, first word of the line, Toshma. Mikora ditakantin yosim masha ish writes Lisa, Isha writes Linase. The Gemara explained before the reason of this law of Ksuba was because a woman wants to get married more than her husband wants to marry her. And if you'll tell me that this is true of collecting from the inheritors, this line of reasoning has nothing to do with the inheritors. This line of reasoning clearly has to do with the husband, saying that the woman should not be treated preferentially, like a creditor is treated preferentially, and get and get a ksuba from Baininus because the woman wants to get married more than the husband. So there's no need to require it. There's no need to make a decree from the ilas delas, people withholding loans, because nobody will withhold from getting married if their ksuba is going to turn out to be unziburis. And that line of reasoning does not apply to the inheritors. Therefore, this is a question of Mar Zutra, and it remains unanswered. Okay, we're at the 2 dots, about a quarter of the way down, 50a. Are we together? Omer Mar Zutra, brother of Nachman, Mishmeder of Nachman. Mar Zutra says in the name of Nachman, the son of Nachman says in the name of Nachman. Shtar Chai v'yetzi al Yisayim, Apish akosted by Shvach, Ein Agayva element as Ziburis. This Gemara is a little bit easier, not much. Basically, a guy writes in a document, I'm borrowing $100. When you pay back idis, best assets. Okay, then the guy dies. Do the inheritors, the Yisayimim, do they pay from idis, or do they pay from, or do they pay from Ziburis? So Amar Abai, 1 second. And a guy element is Ziburis. So Mar Zutra says they still collect from Ziburis, even though the document says idis. Because you're collecting from the kids, you pay Ziburis. Amar Abai says, Tate, I'll bring you a proof. The Balchoyev Dina Bebeinis. Umiyasmin Ziburis. A regular borrower is supposed to pay back a baininus, but when he dies, the kids pay back Ziburis. Amalei Rava says, hold on a second. Haki Hash, there's no proof. Balchoyev Dina Midiraisa Beziburis. A Balchoyev should really Midiraisa. Should really be getting ziburis, lowest quality. Kidu Ula, like Ula says, the Amar Ula Dvar Torah Balchayev ziburis, that a borrower pays back ziburis. Shenemar b'chutz ta'amav ishshat anoishay. Okay, what's the pasuk here? When we're talking about collecting a collateral, the Torah says the man will go into his house and bring out a collateral. Now, if you had to go into your house and bring out a collateral, what type of collateral would you bring out? The best or the worst? Obviously the worst, because it's your choice. So says Ula that what the Torah here is saying is that it's the prerogative of the borrower to determine what he's paying back. Effectively, Ziburis, because he can get to choose. Ma Dr. Shalish, just like the normal behavior is to take out the weakest, the least valuable of his items. Therefore, so too, therefore he's allowed to pay back Ziburis. Umatam amru b'alchoy b'beinis. So why do they say that a borrower pays back beinis? Because they should tinel delos b'fnei lovin, so that people don't refrain from borrowing. The Gabi Yasmin ukma rabona adaraisa. So with regard to the kids, the rabbi said it's going to be the daraisa payment, which is Ziburis. Elahacha, but over here in this scenario, kivan the dine midaraisa b'idis. So Rava says that if that's the case over here, since he committed to paying back idis, the kids also have to pay back idis. The guy dies, the kids are also responsible for idis. So we have a major debate here between Mar Zutra and Abaya against Rava. Mar Zutra and Abaya are both of the opinion that say that if you specify idis, the kids still pay Ziburis. And Rava says no. The kids will have to pay back idis. Gemara has a question on Rava. Vatani Avram Chayzal. Avram was called Avram Chayzal. He was able to see apparently very well. Ein it nefron minitzei Yisayimim element aziburis. The Brisa says when you pay back from the kids, you pay back ziburis. Va'afilu hein zaken. Even if you're paying back damages. Hold on. V'hana zaken dina midiraisa beidis. Damages midiraisa is paid back in idis. And once the guy dies, what do the kids pay back? They pay back ziburis. So Gemara says there's no proof in this price. Okay, in other words, what's the proof here? The proof is from damages. Damages midiraisa are idis, because you have to pay meitav, the best. And yet when the guy dies, we put him down to ziburis. So there's a question on Rava. Rava says if the guy writes down in the document idis, he still has to pay back idis when he dies. His kids have to pay back idis. So why is it different than a zikin? Why don't we push him down to ziburis? Says the Gemara, no. Truth of the matter is that you're right. According to Rava, the kids would also have to pay back idus from Nezikin. So what's the explanation of the brisa? The explanation is we're going with Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says the determination of idus is with the nizik, with the one who was damaged. And we're talking about here, if we had to give the properties ratings, the nizik has properties rated from low to high, 1, 2, and 3. And the mazik, the damager, has 10, 8, and 3. So midaraisa, the damager is required to pay at least a 3 or more, which is his least valuable asset. But midarabanan, we said you should pay back 10. And with regard to the kids, we said no, the kids, you go back to the daraisa, you can pay back to 3. Since the 3 is the best of the nizik. The Omer midaraisa the nizik shamin may take an olam to kina rabbanon with the mazik. You know, to discourage people damaging, the rabbi said you pay back your own personal best, which should be a 10. But with regard to the kids, the rabbis say pay back the raisa level, which is going to be the 3. Your lowest, but the best of the nizik. So the Gemara asks again about Tani. Any, this is not the case. Vatani Rabbi Eliezer Niyusa. Aina from Mechasim Yisayim Elam Naziburis. Afilu Hanedis. When you pay back from Yisayim, you only pay back from the Ziburis property, even if it's idis. What exactly does that mean? Maya Afilu Hanedis. What does that mean? Lav Aflagav Dechsiv Idis B'Shtora. Presumably, what he means is that even though idis, the document was written that he'll pay back the best idis, you still pay back ziburis. So Gemara says no, not necessarily. My idis, shapoy idis. One second. Okay, as follows. What happened was the guy was supposed to collect the best property, 10. And then what happened was the 10 was either confiscated or it was flooded. It was effectively ruined. Once that happens, we say that you're treated like a Baal Chayv, like a creditor. And now if he dies, you'll get ziburis. Why is this? Because Rava, like the opinion of Rava, the Rava, his ziburis gave him an idis. If you damage ziburis, lowest quality property, you still collect best quality. Shapoy idis, let's say the best property was destroyed or permanently ruined. Gave him in habeninus, you pay back baininus. You pay back mid-range property. The Gabi asked me, in other words, why do you pay back baininus? Because like a Bachoyev collects baininus. However, with regard to the kids, when you're collecting from the orphans, you pay back, you get back the deraisa level, which would be ziburis once the idis were destroyed. Okay. So effectively, the Gemara remains unresolved, which means that there's debate here between Abaya and Rava with regard to if the guy declares specifically he'll pay back idis. Do the kids have to acknowledge that request after the man himself dies? You pay back from the assets of the orphans. You pay back ziburis, lowest quality. Boy, Rav Achadvi Barami. Rav Achadvi Barami had the following question: when we talk about the orphans here, are we talking about the orphans are underage, or even if they're adults, are they children or adults? To kantihid over Rabbanon Gabi asked the tanim over Rabbanon the loy over Rabbanon ideal mission to loy masik adaite the milf the mislife. So in other words, is this because the kids they don't really know how to go to court, so therefore we say take the lowest quality property, or not, or maybe the reason is different. The reason is because why are you collecting baininess? You're collecting baininess because we're afraid we don't want the lenders to close the door on borrowers. But the guy dying obviously is a very unlikely possibility, and it won't close the door if we change the rule for when a borrower dies. So therefore, it makes no difference whether the kids are children or adults. The borrower doesn't expect the lender doesn't expect the borrower to die, and that the money should go to the kids. That would cause him to refrain from lending out money. Therefore, even the kids, the adults, also are in the same category, and they also would only have to pay ziburis. Toshma, let's examine this. Tanya Bayak Shisha taught. When we talk about the orphans, we talk about gedolim but ain't tzarich lehem ktanim. We talk about adults and certainly children. Okay, so presumably this is true with regard to paying back money as well. You pay back not only do the children pay back ziburis, but also the adults. The Gemara says loy le'inyan shvua. The gadol b'mil da'avur k'katan dami. Inyan ziburis loy. What does that mean? So there is two rules when it comes to paying back from orphans. Rule number one is that you don't pay back. 1 second. Rule number one is you when you're collecting from orphans, you pay back minimum quality. Rule number two is that when you pay back from when you collect from orphans, you must make a shvua. This is a shvua d'Rabbanan, a rabbinical shvua that your father never paid back the loan. Why is this? Obviously, because the kids, whether they're adults or children, don't know if their father paid back the loan. Therefore, it's not really fair that maybe the father would have said, "I paid you back." So therefore, the Beis Din says we're going to require you to make a shvua. So maybe this statement of Abaye Shisha is talking about shvua, not talking about payment from property. And because shvua, the children and the adults are effectively in the same category. None of them know what their father's personal responsibilities were. And the Gemara resolves this. The halacha is top of Nunam Beis. We talk about the orphans, adults, and certainly children. Both for making a shvua and for collecting from ziburis, both adults and children in the same category. They both require a shvua. They both are paid back from ziburis. Let's see the next. Just start the next Gemara. Okay, let's just review. See this again tomorrow anyway. We'll stop there. Okay, great day. Tomorrow is early, that's correct. Tomorrow is 5:45.